Hey, what's up guys? In this video, we're gonna be learning how to use the Orton effect in post-processing to create those really dreamy landscape photographs. What is the Orton effect? Situational uses for you to use this effect in your own photography, and also how to do it in both Luminar and Photoshop right after this. Hey, what's up guys, and welcome into the video. On this channel, we talk landscape photography. So if you're into landscape photography at all, consider subscribing to this channel. Now in this video specifically, we're gonna be looking at the Orton effect and how you can use the Orton effect to create those surreal, dreamy photographs. But first of all, you may have seen this title and been like, what is the Orton effect? How do I use that at all? And how do I understand it? Well, the Orton effect was developed by a photographer in the mid-1980s, a guy named Michael Orton, who went out and he would take 2 sheets of film for 1 image. So the first sheet of film, he would create in perfect exposure in focus. The second sheet, he would create overexposed and out of focus. And then in post-processing in the film darkroom, he would merge those 2 pieces of film together to create a single image that revealed a dreamy, surreal, almost like watercolor-esque type of landscape photograph. Yes, darkroom manipulation has been around for a long time. Now we just do it digitally. So what is a digital Orton effect going to do for your landscape photography? Well, what it basically does is it's going to blend your highlights and shadows a lot more and create like softer tones and more dialed down tones to create like the surreal, dreamy ambiance in your landscape photography. This is a really popular effect that you can use right now in landscape photography, and it's been made very popular by some of the best names in photography. So what I wanted to do to first show you how to do this is show you in 2 different types of software. The first, we're gonna go through the software that I use for post-processing in Luminar. That link is below in the video description for you to check out if you wanna look at Luminar a little bit further. And then we're going to use it in Photoshop to show you how to use the Orton effect in Photoshop to create dreamy photos. Then after that, I wanna tell you like situational uses, how you should use this effect in your photography. All right guys, so the first software that I want to show you how to do the Orton effect with is with Luminar. This is a software that I use for my landscape photography editing, and Luminar makes it really easy for you to use the Orton effect. Basically, this is a finished image that I already have edits to, and the Orton effect is going to be my last step to editing this image. So basically all I'm going to do is go to Add Filters, and then in the filters is the Orton effect filter. So I'm gonna select the Orton effect, get rid of this filters catalog, and I have 2 options here. Now the 2 options that I have for the Orton effect are just 2 looks that I can use for my landscape photographs. It really varies from image to image on how these 2 types of Orton effects look. I'll show you that in just a second. Let's stick with type 1. Basically, I'm just going to pull the amount up of the Orton effect that I want over my entire image just to see what it's actually going to do. Now, like I told you earlier on what the Orton effect is actually going to do, you'll see that it's going to soften edges. Now, don't get too concerned with that right now. I know we love sharp images. I'm gonna show you how to seclude this to specific parts of your image. But let's just look at the Orton effect in general right now. So we're on type 1. I can pull this up to almost 50% and then select type 2. It's just gonna alter this, make this a little bit more dull, a little bit more, it has like a greenish tint to it. I like type 1 much better for my landscape photographs because I feel like it's more bright, it has more saturation, it just looks a little bit better for landscapes. You can also adjust your softness to this if you want it a little bit more soft or less soft, however you want to do that. I'm gonna hit Control Z to get it back to 15. You can select brightness. How bright do you want this effect to be? You can pull it all the way up and make it really bright or keep it down on 0. And then contrast too, you can adjust your contrast in this to however much contrast you want in your image. Again, I'm gonna hit Control or Command Z to bring it back down. 15 is a really good spot for me to be with this effect. I'm gonna pull my saturation on this up just a bit, just to make it glow a little bit more with some color that I have in parts of my image. Then, since I don't want, look, I want to keep this pretty sharp in the middle of my image. I don't want it to be like glowy and surreal as the Orton effect does. So how do I seclude this to specific types of my image? Well, what I'm going to do is keep this on like 39 where I have it right now. Then I'm gonna select my paintbrush up here in the Orton effect bar, and I'm going to select brush. Now what this is going to do is allow me to paint this effect into my image. I wanna be sure with this brush that my size is a decent size and my softness is all the way up, opacity like 50%, just to brush this in and keep the obvious point of painting in low. So I don't want this to be like really obvious that I'm making this painting in and only applying it to specific parts of this image. So what I'm going to do is just brush this in to the sky element right here, just barely, and I mean not very like tediously brush it in, but just make brush strokes over this part of the image to bring in the Orton effect. And then I'm also going to paint down into the corners of this just to get a little bit of that effect in too, because I have a nice vignette in this and I want the Orton effect to be brought in on the edges and kind of complement that vignette in this image too. And I think that looks pretty good. As you'll see over here, it's basically created a mask for us on where this is painted in. So what I'm gonna do is select this eye icon and turn this on and off for you to show you that I've created like a dreamy effect in the clouds and in the corners of this image, but in the core of this image, the main part, I've kept it sharp and I've kept the subject obvious and in perfect focus so that I know what the subject matter is and I haven't messed that up at all with any like glowing out of focus. So that's kind of how I like to use the Orton effect. It's also brought in some more saturations up here as well. So that's a pretty simple process to do in Luminar. Now I'm going to show you how to do this in Photoshop. The process is much more complex. That's why I love Luminar, because the process is so much simpler. I literally have one filter to choose from and like 3 or 4 sliders that I have to adjust and then paint this in. The Photoshop process is much more complicated. So I'm just gonna locate Photoshop to show you guys how exactly I do this to the same image. Okay, so I'm gonna be adjusting the exact same image. So I'm gonna select my background layer and hit Controller Command J to duplicate that, just to have a starting point to work on from this. And then with this layer selected, the one I copied, I'm gonna go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. So when I select Gaussian Blur, this option comes up of your radius on this blur effect. So basically what you do with this and kind of how you decide on what you want, you can either pull this slider up to a point that you like, or select something of your pixel count on your camera. So I shot this with a 24 megapixel camera, so I'm just gonna type in 24. I'm gonna hit OK, and now this whole image is really blurred out for us to see. I mean, this isn't the final step. We have a little bit more to go to. So I'm going to select this same layer again, and I'm going to go to Image, Adjustments, Brightness, Contrast. So this is going to allow me to make some even more edits to this Gaussian blur to create the Orton effect. So with contrast, I'm going to go pretty high on this just to create more detail and stark contrast within the blur. And then brightness, I'm just going to pull up a little bit. So contrast, I pull up more than brightness in this just to know this process more. And then I'm going to hit OK. So now we have more contrast and more brightness, but it's still really blurry. So how do we control that? Well, I'm gonna pull the opacity on this layer down more just to show you like how dreamy we can get this, maybe down to like a 20, let's go 30% on this. Then to really paint this only into areas that I want, I'm gonna have to create a layer mask And then I'm going to have to go to my paintbrush, have black selected to conceal this painting in that I'm going to be doing, concealing the Orton effect. And I'm just going to like slightly paint this out of the middle of my photo. And there's our mask that we made right there. And now we have the exact same effect that we did. I've painted out the Orton effect on my mask. If you'll see down here in my layers panel, I've painted it out of the center but kept it in the sky and in the corners of this image for you to see. So basically just two different ways of doing this. One a little bit more complex, Luminar a little bit more simpler. Okay guys, so obviously the Orton effect is really powerful and creates these really interesting surreal images that a lot of people love. But should you use it in all of your photographs? Well, not really. I mean, I don't use it in all of my photographs. I think this is a very situational approach to a post-processing techniques. Just like a lot of things in post-processing, you do it minimally. You do it to still keep everything looking realistic. You keep everything looking correctly adjusted for your landscape photography. So this is a very situational edit that you can add into your post-processing bag of tricks, if you will. So I like to use this when I'm getting away from hard lines. For instance, I like to use this a lot in my skies and sunrises and sunsets with clouds, because with clouds you don't get real hard edges. A lot of times you get surreal colors blending together, and that's the point that I like to use the Orton effect in my images. Also down in the corners, if I'm using a vignette, I'll use this effect down in the corners to create a little more blur, just a tiny bit, enough to really pull more interest to the subject matter in the middle of the image. So this is a real situational approach that I never like to use directly on the subject of my photograph. I like to use it on maybe colors or clouds or edges, some of the complementary, like secondary parts of the photograph that people aren't immediately drawn to, but complement the subject in a nice surreal way. Hey guys, I hope you're gonna be able to use the Orton effect in your own landscape photography after watching this, that you're pumped up, that you're gonna go out and take more photos, because that's what we all love to do. If you like this video or you found it useful at all, hit that thumbs up button. Comment below on your next photo location. Also subscribe to this channel if you want more tutorials on landscape photography and how to get better as a landscape photographer. And then lastly, continuing watching is always an option too. I'm gonna put up the video that's best for you as a viewer based on your YouTube search terms right now on the screen. Thanks so much guys, I'll see you next time.